Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is our first ever poet and philosopher making their official debut here on the channel. Now, my guest today weaves works from philosophy and history into poetry. He has published poems and articles in online and print magazines, as well as selected writings exploring the role of language in poetry and philosophy. He is fond of continental philosophy with a focus on Nietzsche and French post-structuralism. His essays and books number many, each of which weaves philosophy across disciplines, revealing that they too have philosophical foundations. He's currently a philosopher who works in metaphysics and epistemology, with occasional forays in aesthetics, ethics, and general philosophy. He has written and published a select number of essays ranging from a defense of Derrida's philosophy to an examination of the virtues of Walter Kauffman. He studies the non-systematic philosophies that trace back to Goethe and Nietzsche, and in contrast, his own philosophy is intensely fragmented to suggest that the state of life and philosophy is not a monolithic singular event, but a process of change. In that sense, he is an anti-foundationalist at heart and at times can appear close to figures such as Richard Rorty. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, poet and philosopher Rex Eloquens. Rex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, Rex. Awesome. So, before we dive into your background as a philosopher and as a poet, let's start off with a little icebreaker question. Is there a random fact that not a lot of people may know about you?
A random fact that, yeah, I guess you could say I was born on Halloween, actually.
Ooh,
Yep,
nice. That's
1999,
cool.
October 31st, and not a lot of people like it's an uncommon birthday. So I've been told, the people who look at my if I go get my driver's license or if I do something government work, they'll look at my birthday and be like, "Oh, you're a Halloween baby." I'm like, "Yeah."
Nice. That's actually pretty cool. I don't think
Mhm.
I've actually had a lot of guests on the show who said that they were born on Halloween. I know I've had a lot of guests who say that Halloween is their favorite holiday, but never that they were born on Halloween. So
Oh yeah.
that is pretty cool. That is amazing. So now, with a little teaser into your background, Rex, as we dive deeper later on, what can you tell our viewers and listeners about your background as a poet and as a philosopher?
Well, I could first start off with we can go back to the pandemic era, lockdown era. It was really then that I kind of fell in love with literature, and I've read novels before, for school, for things that were just mandatory, and I read here and there, but it was then that I really started to take a deep dive into it, and then that is really when I should say I fell into philosophy. I mean, I didn't go in there on purpose. It's
Right.
just kind of um, studying one figure's philosophy kind of tumbled and it turned into learning about the entire philosophical tradition, you know, from Plato to the medieval era, all the way to Kant until 20th century and until now. It just kind of stumbled that way. And yeah, I've just taken it ever since. I've taken independent study. I've taken classes too, the non-formal ones. I
Mhm.
did have one philosophy class in college years ago, but that is really to the extent to which I've learned professionally. But I've
Mm,
taken it on my own, and I've been in academic circles for some time now, and it's based on my own merit. It's just because I love to learn, and I do it for the love of the game, honestly.
nice. Okay. So, would you say that the pandemic was the starting point, your aha moment, or was that a different moment entirely later on, post pandemic?
I think I think the 2 are pretty related. I don't wanna separate them too much because it was during the pandemic that I started to read more, and then, I don't know if you know Michael Segru. He was a large philosophy, YouTuber, and I accidentally found one of his videos too, and that also helped me learn more about different figures. He's passed away now since then, but uh, I've learned a lot from him, and kind of a lot of things in tandem happened for me to get into this. So I want to say it was just a process, get away from the starting and from the endpoints, and just say it turned out to be this way. But if you were asking more specifically, one of the books that completely changed the way I think and now I reread over and over, it is Walter Kauffman's, just like you said in the intro, Walter Kauffman's critique of religion and philosophy.
Mm.
That kind of, if I can add a little bit more, sorry,
No, go ahead.
if I can add a little bit more, it kind of broke me away from the stereotype idea I've had of philosophy in my head. We're getting away from the ancients, we're getting away from the Platonic forms, from virtue. Kauffman was the first source really that I read that was 20th century philosophy. It was completely different from what I thought, say, reality was, or what I thought a good nonfiction book was. It's completely just, it opened up new terrain for me. And that's when, I guess you could say, after reading Walter Kauffman, that's when I started to take this more seriously. It wasn't just a hobby. I wanted to get into it, know as much as I can, and, start producing of my own, start writing down my own thoughts, what I thought about this. And yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right. And now that you jump to that point when you started writing your own thoughts, your own philosophy, because I'm very, very intrigued to learn more about how you've taken other works from different philosophers and kind of found your own that really makes sense to you. So, can you walk us through your first essay, your first publication that you did that really highlighted what you learned from the past philosophers, but also exemplifying your own philosophy?
It would have to be an essay that I had published on an academic forum on metaphilosophy. And uh, to give you just a short overview, metaphilosophy is basically the part of philosophy that says, okay, how does philosophy work? How do we get this kind of inquiry? It's a meta look into philosophy itself. If
Mm,
philosophy is prying into questions and things, clearing away the muck, then metaphilosophy would be, okay, let's take an overhead view of that practice itself. And when I wrote the essay on metaphilosophy, I want to say, a little bit of a controversial take. I said, well, if that's the case, isn't that just regular philosophy then? It is not much different. It's not a special kind of area that's opened up in philosophy itself. It's just philosophy prying into itself. It's not, it's part of metaphysics. That is to say, it is part of the standard practice of inquiry and methodology. It doesn't break away from that. And there's a lot of meta philosophers, believe it or not, who have the contrary view and say, "Oh no, it's a special thing entirely. It's autonomous. It's an autonomous part of philosophy that takes care of itself." But
mm,
I disagree with that view, and I synthesized that idea from Heidegger, a German philosopher in the 20th century, who basically says the social is metaphysical. We are part of that social fabric, and so that kind of those Heidegger and those philosophers that came after Heidegger that are inspired by him take the view that it is not an autonomous subject at all. It is human made, and humans are part of that social fabric. We're
mm,
part of a community, and that's where it comes from. It's not a transcendental, ahistorical structure that we're looking into, as a meta philosopher might say. The practice of philosophy is it's not that at all. It's a social practice,
mm,
and so you could say that my reading in the 20th century, especially from Heidegger and from Derrida, who was a huge Heidegger was a huge inspiration for him. I took that from there and we're like, okay, here's how I can apply this to analytic problems in the Anglo-American tradition now. And that is exactly what I did. And that essay, short essay, short and sweet, but I think it got the point across, and it is also my most read so far, or at least one of them.
all right. Now, in terms of writing poetry and also writing philosophy, I'm very curious the thought process that goes into it. And I don't know if the outlining structure is the same. I've actually talked with a friend of mine who is also a fellow philosopher, and in his opinion, he argues that unlike with nonfiction writers
Mhm.
and writers in general, philosophers and poets, depending on their discipline and philosophy, are more pantser related as opposed to being more detailed and outline oriented. And I'm wondering, Rex, where you kind of stand on this. Are you more of an outliner, a planner of what your writing is going to be, or would you consider yourself a poet and a philosopher who write from the seams of their pants?
I would honestly say more of the latter. Well, here's the thing: it's a little bit of both, if I'm being honest. I don't want to separate it too much, that idea, because sometimes the way I write, at least when it comes to me, is it's more of like a flash. I have a good idea. I'm like, oh, I'm going to put that down right now, and I'll come back to thinking about it and I'll expand on it later.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be said for poetry too. Or sometimes poems just come to me. Yeah, I'm reading, or oh, I get it in my head. I'm like, okay, I'll start it. Or if it's not finished, then I'll come back to it later. And I think much is the same when it comes to my philosophical papers too. I think about a problem and it's planned out, but I'd say more it's spontaneous than anything. Well, I think that is more in the tradition of the poets, the novelists, the narrativists than it is strictly philosophical here. Because uh, if there is kind of a rift in philosophy that I think it's important to know too, because this problem, or what you asked me, has to do with it. It is that continental philosophy is more considered like literary. It is literary.
Right.
It is more free flowing, and they're not concerned with problems of strict logic, strict truth, or whatever that means. They're not concerned with that as much. But here in the Anglo-American tradition, we have analytic philosophy, and analytic philosophy is more concerned with logic chopping, truth, truth tables, mathematics, things such as that. So there's kind of a rift in philosophy itself, and I kind of think that I pull more from like the continental side, the more free flowing side, the more literature side. Let's look into this literary analysis. What are the tools to help us look at this text? Things like that, as opposed to the analytic side. And so I think my writing process is reflective of that, of going to the continental side and, bringing it down here.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very, very true. And I'm very, very intrigued to hear your thoughts on, sort of the philosophers you've sort of chosen to read and learn from, to study. You mentioned Nietzsche several times in your biography,
Mhm.
and I'm very, very curious what drew you to studying Nietzsche, and of course later on Kauffman. As you said, that Kauffman was a 20th century philosopher that kind of was really,
Mhm.
the first 20th century philosopher that really changed your way. But what about them, in your opinion, made them so fascinating to learn and to study from that point of view?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking, by the way.
No
Uh,
problem.
I'll say the two are definitely interlinked, because my reading of Kaufman, this is interesting because it's the other way around. Kaufman, Walter Kaufman, if you didn't know, he's basically the person who salvaged Nietzsche's reputation in the 20th century. I mean, he was dead in the water because Nietzsche until then had been kind of misused, taken out of context by the Nazis and by,
Mm,
Germany. So because of that stigma, no one wanted to touch Nietzsche. No one wanted to go back to the original text and read it. Nietzsche's sister actually had something to do with that too. She also helped tarnish his reputation in that matter. But uh, putting that aside for now, Walter Kaufman is the man who kind of he made Nietzsche emerge in the public consciousness, and he put a different line on it. He said, "No, Nietzsche's not this racist. He's not this," and he's also one of the greatest translators of Nietzsche. But my coming to Kaufman was through Kaufman's original work,
mm,
and I only really found out about his translation of Nietzsche, his entire, the portable, all of his, the portable Nietzsche, all of his editing too. That okay, Kaufman was the guy who, like, people come through to Kaufman through Nietzsche, and not the other way around. I came through Kaufman first, and then I found out he did all that with Nietzsche, and the two, the two's philosophy, both of their philosophy, I should say, is interlinked. I think Kaufman draws a lot from Nietzsche. He works with an interpretation. He doesn't care about, let's say, absolute, objective, transcendent truth. Nothing of that sort. And in the same way, I would say Nietzsche does too. Nietzsche in his essay on truth, he says, what is truth but just an army of metaphors? Some of them are worn out, some of them are, and I think Kauffman takes that. And so when I went to Kauffman, I was sort of learning Nietzsche by proxy, and then I went back
Mm.
and studied Nietzsche himself, or at least through the Kauffman translations, and then came all the other Nietzsche texts. And yeah, I like I said, this ties back to what I said in the beginning. I tumbled into it. This was not a plan. I just kind of went into it, and I enjoyed loving it. Like, I enjoyed it because I was having thoughts that I thought that I would say I've never thought without reading. It made me more. It made me think that what I'm thinking now doesn't have to necessarily be that way. And that was the great allure to someone like Nietzsche too, who is also poetic. He's a poet philosopher, and he puts the philosopher, or at least himself, in the poet's place, and that's the way to go. I think it's impressive, but yeah, hopefully that roughly answers your question.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. And now a two-part question, Rex.
Mhm,
As a poet and as a philosopher, when you work on a different piece that's maybe in conjunction to a previous one or entirely separate, because as you
mhm.
mentioned that when you get an idea or an inspiration comes, you immediately write it down to collect it and to have it. So with every piece you have written, what was not only your goal as the poet, philosopher, and the writer at the time, but also the promise you're making not just to yourself, but also people who will read your essays and poems as well?
I think if I can sum it up in one word, it would be education, and
Mm.
not in the way where it's I envision myself as a teacher handing down, pre-written pre-written answers to the students or anything like that. I want to open up people's mind like how reading Kaufman opened up mine. And even if I understand, if it is my understanding that I'm just giving my particular interpretation of something or my perspective on how I view this philosophical problem, uh, I understand that it can possibly help someone come up with their own ideas. It can help them think. It can help them think critically. And whenever I do write something, that is usually in the back of my mind. How can I make this readable? How can I make this not just jargon? You know, some philosophers have been charged with just, garrulous talking and all that. But uh, I go in with clarity, and I want people to understand and to also contribute in their own way, because I believe philosophy is part of literature. It's a bizarre part of literature. But in a way, I am contributing to a literature, and I want people to read my work, come away with something valuable, something that can possibly help them in their life. And if I'm lucky, they can contribute to the literature too by adding something different, or maybe pointing out something that I overlooked or that other philosophers overlooked. And yeah, so I think I would sum it up in education, just in a broad sense.
Nice. Very, very nice. And now we get into something that I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on.
Mhm,
That is, of course, like all writers, we always find ourselves with these two things, and that is imposter syndrome and the dreaded writer's block. We're always going to be impacted by these, no matter what avenue of writing we do, whether we are
mhm,
poets, whether we are philosophers, or fiction and nonfiction writers, novelists, what have you. We're always going to encounter these two.
mhm.
So, for you, Rex, how do you handle and deal with those two aspects that really hinder a lot of creative people?
I think the imposter syndrome thing is especially difficult to get over, that little rump, because you start having these ideas like, oh, perhaps I'm not good enough as the greats I'm reading, or maybe I'm not cut out for this. But I think the only thing you can do for imposter syndrome, or at least what's worked for me, is to steel yourself. You
Hmm.
know, I don't think you're not going to get if you have imposter syndrome and you're a writer, you're not going to get over it in a day or even a week. I think it's a process and it takes time. At least that's in my experience what happened. And as you write more, as you build more, as you read more, I think you'll eventually start to have more faith in yourself. And maybe someday you'll live through your answer and you'll find that you did overcome this kind of self-doubt and negative talk. And it's tough. I don't blame anyone who necessarily wants to quit because of it, because being a writer right now is especially hard, especially with
Hmm.
AI and everything, just the
Oh yeah.
circumstances of the world. But I would say if you persevere and it is something you really love, then keep going for it, and I think you will overcome your imposter syndrome. But for your other question, for the writer's block, I do get writer's block too. I'm not a perfect human being or anything like that, but I noticed that when I get it, I run a monthly newsletter, so sometimes I deal with it. But when I get writer's block and I have no idea what to put pen to paper, I usually read or take a break because I feel like if I try to force something, it will come out choppy and not as good. It'll feel like I didn't put my heart into it, if that makes
Mm.
sense. Like I didn't put as much passion as I could have into a sentence or into an essay. So what I do is I would take a break for maybe a week or two, a few days. It depends, and I find that the next topic is waiting for me. It comes to me whenever it's ready. I don't force it. I'd like to sort of get downloads, so to speak, and I think that is my way of doing it. I don't force trying to get rid of writer's block, or I I wait it out. I wait it out too, and I think I'm not afraid of it being a long time or anything. It just comes to me.
Very well spoken, Rex. Very well spoken. And now, kind of turning into some more reflection, which I think is very, very
Mm,
poetic, since philosophy, in of its core, no matter what discipline or teaching, is all about some matter of personal
mhm,
reflection. For you, I imagine when you started down this path and writing and presenting your works on, different forums or your own feed, it was a way to, as you said, to be educational. But being a poet and being a philosopher now in the digital age is not the same as it was 20 years ago. And I'm sure you have seen a lot of people quoting from different philosophers, but maybe forgetting what the actual message was, or making posts using philosophy that have no bearing on the subject whatsoever, that it's a misappropriation of the poet's words, the philosopher's teachings, and it may be irksome to some degree to see the misuse and abuse of philosophy. And again, going back to this notion of writer's block and imposter syndrome, the digital age definitely does heighten it because we do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of people. Our
mhm,
writing is out there. It is out there to be brutally critiqued and torn apart in some cases, or have people greatly misinterpret what our writing is. So, with that said, Rex, what has still disciplined you to still stay true to your path, your morals, your conviction as a poet and philosopher?
That is also another great question, by the way.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I Let me first comment on what you mentioned earlier. I do see a lot of fake quotes. I do see a lot of uh, quotes ripped out of context too. I think our era is kind of obsessed with just getting these snazzy looking lines, or maybe these profound lines, and then just ripping them out and putting them on a meme or putting them on some other, without actually ever checking the source. And I do think that's kind of hurt philosophy's image a bit, but in a way that does kind of reinforce me, because I know that when I cite someone or when I mention someone, I always have my citation. I try to read, and I'll even say, look, this is my interpretation of the work. This is my understanding of it. You may have a different one, or it could be like totally wrong, could be totally out there. But I think the kind of discipline involves, it's going to be a kind of a cop out answer, but I think some academic standards are useful and helpful in this regard, especially when it comes to citation, especially when it comes to sentence structure and writing,
Mhm.
because I think part of being a clear writer is that you need to make things readable and to not kind of hide behind your words, behind a wall of jargon, so that people will have to sort of figure their way into their own position while reading your work. I know post-structuralist, continental tradition, a lot of philosophers, and even before, like even the German idealists, a lot of problems like with Hegel and all that, all of their rough, rough, vigorous, impenetrable verbiage. It's just I I think in the way I discipline myself is I try not to be that. Um, Walter Kauffman, speaking of, actually, has the same view, and he says that someone like Immanuel Kant, for instance, was covering up errors in his thinking because of his jargon, and so
Mhm.
he strives to be clear so that anyone can pick up the book, non-academic alike. You know, non-academic, academic, they can pick up the book and they can understand what you mean. And even if I do use some academic things like proper citations, have my sources cited page, have the quotes, etc. Even if I do pull from that academic sphere, I also try to make it readable for everyone. And I think that kind of keeps me on my toes because sometimes I see myself using a lot of words that I'm like, okay, well, this might not be so clear to someone. Or let me try to expand on it or see if I can explain it in my language as opposed to, heavy terminology or something like that.
Mm. Very well said. And now going into another thing, which is the rise of generative AI. And this is what I find really interesting is generative AI philosophers and quotes, which I've seen appear a lot on social media, specifically on YouTube, and kind of backpedaling a little bit. I myself began my career as a writer during the lockdown era, as did many others. And this has sparked a debate of whether or not, because of that, we are in a golden age of authors. For a long time, that was the case. But with the rise of generative AI taking the forefront and being used to create new things, it has shifted the narrative. And especially when it comes to philosophy and poetry, I've seen a lot, and I'm pretty sure you may have seen a lot too, Rex, of AI generated poets and
Oh yeah.
philosophers where it feels stale and it doesn't have that same human voice, that human aspect to it. So I'd like to know, in your opinion, as a writer as well, do you feel that we are teetering towards a AI generated cyber dark age?
It's hard to know since I'm not a prophet, but I will say there's a lot of negativity about it, and I do agree with said negativity, as in like it's very bad for writers. But I try to also think that there's kind of a pro to it. And so, let's say with the rise of generative AI, you see a lot of AI artists, in quotation marks, AI writers having this kind of stale, boring works to read or paragraphs. I think that has also, on the flip side, made people appreciate human-made things more. Uh, like if you go on sites like Substack or even Medium or even LinkedIn, you'll see a
Mhm.
lot more people who dislike AI instead of trying to shove it out, or writers who can persevere in the face of this. I think that is kind of steeled them, and I think
Right.
that is also very important. And it's also made people in who like literature in general kind of distrustful of AI, dislike
Mhm.
AI, but also appreciate what humans wrote more, good or not. And I think that is a positive, but overwhelmingly, it is difficult to say that on the whole this is positive. I'm
Right.
not sure, to be honest. Like I know a lot of writers have already been uh, basically replaced with AI, and a lot of companies are cutting corners, and so
Mhm.
that does hurt people's livelihoods. But and that is I don't agree with that. I think that is negative. That is terrible. But I think the writers,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think the writers who will stick around, who can persevere through this, I think they're writers through and through. They're gonna write no matter what, even if everyone else is using AI or most people are using AI. Even if no one reads their work, they're still gonna be writers. And so I do agree that this is very negative, and I have no idea how advanced AI writing will actually get, if it can be perfected at all. That's another question, another thing that's out there. Um, I still think there will be a place for the human being, though. All in all, that's just the optimistic side of me speaking. But
Mhm.
I still think as long as there are platforms where even people are doing their best to shove AI images and AI writing into it, I think the human beings writing will still get attention. And even if it's just based on that, someone put their passion behind it. I think that means something.
Yes, I have to agree. I have to agree. So now let's talk about another thing which you actually hinted a little bit at, Rex, which is audience and presentation.
Mhm.
Because like any writer, when it comes to understanding our audience, it is very important. And that's when you have to really do due diligence to figure out, okay, we've written this, but who is this actually for? As you mentioned, Kaufman, when he wrote his works, wrote it in a way that anyone could pick up his work and understand it and not be bogged down by the jargon. You didn't have to be a fellow philosopher, a fellow academic to understand what he was talking about. You could easily pick it up. And that comes with a lot of trial and error to really make sure that your own voice
Mhm.
is being authentic, but you're also highlighting your own understanding of the materials. Because, as you also said, you as a philosopher, you want to educate people. You want to, going further, I'd like to say, enlighten people, make them think on their own placement in the world. So, for you, Rex, in that regard, as a philosopher, how do you balance the two?
Wow, how do I balance the two? Like I said, there's some earlier, or like my answer earlier, I think there is some discipline involved. There has to be discipline, especially when it comes to writing clearly or having that commitment to making sure anyone can pick it up, not just an academic. Uh, I myself, I read a lot of literature about writing too, to sharpen my voice, because I understand, as the more you read, the more you pick up, little verbal tricks, metaphors, the more you pick up styles, different kinds of styles. And I think you can kind of form your own from that. But at the same time, writing specific literature that, focuses on, or I should even say focuses on grammar, rhetoric, that will definitely help a lot. And I think you have to pace yourself with how you read and what you read too. So, like I said, it's a matter of discipline. How I balance the two, I would usually, let's say I'm studying a philosopher right now. I'm reading his book today and tomorrow, and maybe the next day I look back and try to sharpen my own writing by reading a book about rhetoric or a book about grammar, perfect grammar. I would have, I struck, it depends on the project I'm working on, but I'll say I'm not just reading one thing purely, like, let's say, an author straight. I'm reading a book straight and completely done. What I like to do is sometimes it's okay to take a break from the text, not too long, so you'll forget. But let's say if you want to sharpen your writing, or if you want to articulate this idea and you don't know how, um, open a journal, practice. Practice what you know, jot down some ideas. That helps a lot more than people think. I think we've kind of lost some of that in the digital age, if I'm being honest. But that's what I do. And if I am sore from reading 3 hours of a philosophy book, I'll pick up something else that can refresh my mind and keep me going.
Mhm.
Well, there is a little bit of there is discipline too, because I do try to do the considered boring stuff, like, let's say, working on grammar or sentence structure, using the word, finding the right word sense. It can be a little boring. I'm not going to lie, but I think the results will definitely prove themselves very worthy of the trip, I should say.
Yes, absolutely well said, Rex. Very well said. And now, when it comes to being a poet, here's actually
Mhm.
a fan question that one of my subscribers would like to ask you.
Okay.
And they ask, let me sure I actually have the right one. There's a lot. There's a lot of fan questions I've gotten for this month for a lot of guests. And this fan question is, okay, a very big one, but I want to try to summarize it.
Okay.
They would like to know, as a poet, how have you instilled history into your writing? And do you believe that history, no matter what aspect of history, has some basis of philosophy, rhetoric in it?
That's a wow. That is a great fan question. Let me first give an example. Just it's easier to give an example of weaving history into poetry. So I wrote a poem in a book I wrote a long time ago called Avalon Heart, and one of the first poems about it involved Thoth, the mythology around Thoth,
Hmm.
the Egyptian god. Actual name in Kemet in ancient Egyptian would be Jehudi, and so just having that knowledge of, let's say, ancient Egyptian mythology, just knowing who Thoth is, for instance,
Right.
I incorporated that into a poem about the ibis bird, which is a symbol of his. So just having that a little bit of background, I think you can expand your vocabulary, and I think you can weave a lot of things through it. And history doesn't need to be I'm reading this mind-numbing text, this tome of just facts through it. I don't think that's what history is. But I think definitely having a background in it, I think it'll be more useful when it comes to your own writing than people think. So, like I said, I wrote that poem in mind with the background of Egyptian gods that I otherwise probably wouldn't have had knowledge of unless I looked into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is one way you could do it, like especially in poetry, if it just comes to you and you're like, oh, this fits together, and I think this can work. I think that's the right way to go, or at least that's a good way to go. And for the second part of that question, I do think history has a philosophical basis. And I know this seems like a bizarre argument to hear at first, but really think about it like this. Um, I'm thinking of a man named Arthur Danto. He wrote a lot about. He was an analytical philosopher, and he wrote a lot about history. But one of the things he said, one of the examples was that imagine there's a chronicler, there's a ancient human chronicler. The thing itself is not human, but let's say it chronicles everything. It's chronicled everything throughout time. But the way it would be presented to humans would basically be unintelligible because it would say, "Oh, person A does this, person B does that." Yeah, and you notice if you've ever read history, you don't read that in history. There's a story to it. There's a narrative. There's a structure. You know, humans are the ones that come up. We write our own histories, and it's a simple plain fact. We write our own histories, but I think it's important to understanding how we kind of inject this extra stuff into history. History is not just a chronicle of or a timeline of events. That's just this happened, and this happened. That's not what history is. We're always making different histories. We always have different narratives about history. I don't think there is, speaking as a philosopher, I don't think there is a single history entirely that we can all agree on and say, this happened like this cleanly and this led to the next event. I mean, historians all the time are arguing with each other about what really happened or whose account has more credibility and things of that nature. So while there is agreement among historians, it's never fully 100% this happened and we know for sure. That's not how history works. I think even historians have more of this idea that there are narratives to history. There are little stories that we say about ourselves, and that has a philosophical basis simply because you know we interject the human element into it. We're not that chronicler that Danto mentioned. We don't talk about a human did this, a human did that, B moves there, this happens. No, no, no. We have our own stories, and that's why if anyone ever wants to look into it or pick up a history book, there are kind of Freudian histories. There are biological evolutionary histories. There are so many different kinds of histories out there that you know there I think holding on to the notion of the history kind of fades away. It doesn't really make sense. There are different accounts of history and how this happened. And so at that point, it kind of has to have a philosophical basis because if I go through the history of, let's say, biology, and I say, okay, well, or this is how this environmental problem acts with humans around here, that becomes totally different from, let's just say, uh, we're looking at societal history. We're looking at a sociology, really. Yeah, there's a lot of spins you can do to it. So, yeah, I think because of the plurality on the subject, it must have a philosophical basis. It must have like people interject their own stories and narratives into it. There's really no way to be perhaps unphilosophical about it, especially if you intertwine history with biology or even Freudian history, which is interesting as it is ridiculous. Yeah, I think it necessarily has a philosophical base. Now we can argue about what it is. I'm not gonna tell. I don't know. I would just. It's a strong intuition. Just hey, we talk about this. We debate about this. It's a changing thing, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's no sharp epistemological difference between history and let's say science. But I know that is a radical take, but yeah,
That
hopefully
is
that answers a
well
little bit.
spoken.
Yeah, Richard Rorty once said that there was no sharp difference between a politician and a scientist. There was no interesting epistemological sharp line between the two. They were both embedded in human practice and social practice. One
Mhm.
doesn't have special privilege over the other. And I'm sorry, that just came to mind right now.
No, no, I thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And kind of leading into that,
Mhm.
as a writer, when do you know when to stop writing, whether it's a philosophical essay or a poem? And when do you know when either one is finished?
That is a good question. It is kind of difficult to tell sometimes. I've definitely had to stop myself from, let's say, turning a 14-page essay into a whole entire book. I didn't want to write an entire book on such a particular topic. But how I come to there, it's very difficult. I will just say I have a sense of when I think I've exhausted a good amount of what I have to say on it. But that kind of begs the question. How do I know that? uh, not sure I can fully answer that, to be honest. I just get a sense that I say, okay, I've said what I wanted to hear, and I feel like I can move on. If I can get a lot of the bulk done, the important points, the important point, and kind of expand on it a little, usually that is good enough. But truth be told, I don't think writing is ever finished. I think writing is always abandoned in that sense because something can always go on, something can always be added or changed, replaced. You know, uh, one of the Segru videos, yeah, the philosopher mentioned an author. I'm not quite sure who said this anymore. It's been a long time, but he said writing is always abandoned.
Mm.
Good text is never, yeah, it's only finished when you're done with it. But truthfully, it could always go on, so it can always be changed, revised infinitely or indefinitely, I should say. So it is a tough question, but I sort of just have a sense for it, and I feel like maybe I've done all I can for this for now, and that's when I call it quits. But it is hard to make that judgment.
It is. It absolutely is. And we now arrive at the final question of this
Mhm,
amazing interview, Rex.
mhm.
Now, we've talked about a lot of things, and you've shared your insight as a poet and a philosopher, sharing with us the people who have inspired you, who have impacted you on your journey, and will continue to inspire you as the years go on. At the end of the day, what do you want people to take away from your essays and poems? And to your fellow poets and philosophers watching this interview, what is your word of wisdom to them?
My words of wisdom would be that perhaps philosophy is not dead. In an age where it sort of seems irrelevant and useless, and despite pragmatism and the neo-pragmatism, like with Rorty, I think philosophy still has a place in society. I think
Mhm.
as long as critical thinking can be done, as long as thinking about a subject and inviting in multiple perspectives can be brought in, I don't think philosophy can die. I think philosophy will live on, however minutely or however not talked about. I think it'll always play a role in human affairs because really it is a human affair. It's an activity and it's a practice. So I would say, please educate yourself, read as much as you can. Oh, of course, it's going to be for pleasure too. Read as much as you can, learn what you can, and love what you do. I think it's really simple. I don't have, let's say, a recipe or a plan or how a poet or philosopher should live their life or anything like that. But I will say, definitely keep learning, keep writing if you write, keep thinking. I think that is really all you can do, and you can watch as the things change around you, or how your very reality changes because you think differently, because you're thinking about it a different way. That's what happened to me, and I recognize that education is never over. No one is ever done being educated or learning from life. It
Mhm.
only stops when you're dead. And I think that's the way to go. Actively seek out knowledge. Seek out knowledge so you can be the classic philosopher by definition. Loving Sophia, loving wisdom. That was the classic name for a philosopher, and I think that's not a bad definition, to be honest. So
Well
my words of
spoken,
wisdom,
Rex. Well
my words of
spoken.
wisdom would be that. Thank you very much, Gabriel.
You're welcome. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing philosophical and poet interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Rex for coming on the show, making its official debut as the first poet and philosopher to grace the Wandering Scribe. Now, Rex, thank you so
Mhm.
much for coming on the show. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as read some of your essays?
Firstly, thank you for having me. It's an honor. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Secondly, to answer that question, I have many of my socials are just my name. So I have a LinkedIn, I have an Instagram, I have a Substack. If you want to find me on academia.com, just search up Rex Eloquens, like how my name is spelled there, or how my name is spelled here. Just look it up. Look me up on Google. I'll come up on Google. You the rest. I also have a master link too, a beacons link. That leads to all my other links, and it should be relatively easy to find me. And my essays are on academia, Phil Papers, and also my newsletter on LinkedIn, and also on Substack and Medium. So there are plenty of places. If you don't catch one, it's probably going to be somewhere else on another platform. So
Excellent. I will attach all those down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. And thank you all again for joining us for another amazing, incredible interview here on the show. A huge thank you to Rex for making his official debut. And if you'd like to see Rex in a following interview, or possibly either in an episode of the Writers Hub, or maybe even the Historians Lounge, because I am looking for guests for season 4, comment down below, viewers and listeners, as well as like and subscribe. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Happy Wednesday, everybody, and we'll see you all next time. Take care, and bye-bye.